All right. I guess I have a part 2, chapter 13.
Yeah.
Chapter 13, Across the Ocean. I'm on page 152. I accidentally closed the camera. All right. It's the last paragraph on page 152. Nervously, the convoy moved forward. The sea had become rough, which everyone aboard knew make it difficult to spot submarines. At 11 a.m., the passengers and crew heard a loud boom. Looking in the direction of the sound, they saw a cloud of black smoke rising above the waves. The ship's horn began to sound, and everyone on deck knew what the signal meant. The passengers hurried to grab their life jackets. Eric and Flo struggled to get Patricia and Heather into theirs. Even though the ship had children's sized life jackets, the jackets were still much too big for Patricia and Heather, causing their arms to stick straight out from their sides. Half an hour later, the passengers were all sitting in neat rows on deck in front of the lifeboats, ready to abandon ship at moment's notice. The entire convoy was zigzagging, trying to outwit the U-boat that was patrolling farther out in the Atlantic Ocean than expected. News soon spread among the passengers and crew that the ship at the back of the line had been sunk. The torpedo had probably hit the ship in the boiler, because the ship had exploded and gone down in less than 2 minutes. Too quickly for anyone to be saved. That's sad. The passengers sat on deck for 3 hours before the captain gave all clear signal. They were not allowed to enter the dining room for lunch. No sooner had Eric lifted Heather into her high chair than the ship's horn blared out again. Someone yelled that the radio officer had received a message that another ship had been hit by a torpedo, and everyone rushed out to the lifeboats again. Eric and Flo tried to keep their children calm. Since everything about the ship and its routine was new to the girls, they did not find it strange at all to be sitting on the deck in rows. Eric smiled as he played with Patricia. For all she knew, this could be what people always did aboard a ship. By this time, it seemed to Eric that the ships were in more danger bunched up in convoy than they would be in lone ships in a big ocean. Apparently, the captains of the ships agreed, because at 3 p.m., the word was given for the ships to fall out of formation and each one to make her way to Canada. The Liddell family sat with the other passengers and watched the ships steam away that had flanked them port and starboard for 2.5 days. Soon, not a single ship was in sight. Everyone was still sitting on deck at 6 p.m. when another message came over the ship's radio. The ship had been sailing parallel to theirs on the port side, and the convoy had been torpedoed and was sinking. Flo squeezed Eric's hand when the passengers heard the news. She and Eric both knew it could just as easily have been their ship that was hit and was sinking. 10 minutes later, they received almost the same message, only this time it was a different ship that had been torpedoed and sunk. Eric began to wonder whether he and his family would all die at sea. Their ship steamed an hour after hour, straining for every bit of speed. The captain hoped that he had outrun the last U-boat, but he couldn't be sure. That night, the passengers were told to sleep on deck, fully dressed and wearing their life jackets. They were each given a few minutes to run below the deck, blankets and pillows from their cabins. It was a long night. The seas were still rough, and the ship lurched from side to side as she continued to maintain a zigzag pattern. The next morning, the sea was calmer, and everyone felt a little safer. The ship was well out of U-boat range. Only a large seagoing submarine could torpedo her now. But such ships did not prowl that far north into the Atlantic Ocean. 3 days later was Canadian Thanksgiving Day. That morning, the captain asked Eric to conduct a special service. Everyone aboard had a lot to be thankful for. The ship was still afloat and now not far from her destination. Also that morning, Patricia and Heather awoke with red dots on their faces. They had measles. This meant more complications for the Liddells, since people arriving in Canada from a foreign country had to go into quarantine if they were sick. When the ship finally docked in Nova Scotia, the family was ordered into Red Cross Center instead of traveling on to Flo's parents' home. Since there was no bedding at the center, once again everyone slept in his or her clothes. The following morning, the family was released and allowed to travel on to Toronto. The Liddells had a short visit with Flo's parents in Toronto. They would like to have stayed longer, but they were due back in China by the end of October. Mr. and Mrs. Mackenzie did not try to dissuade their daughter and son-in-law from returning to China, but they did worry about their safety. From what they had heard from their missionary friends still living there, China was becoming a more dangerous place with each passing day. I might as well, that's the end of chapter 13.